Welcome to Bleach. No, not that Bleach. This Bleach. A series that has nothing to do with its name, other than it gives me a powerful urge to drink it. I'm just kidding. Bleach is nowhere near that bad. But it does have a lot of really unusual names. It's like the writer just smashed his head against a keyboard and then added some vowels where needed to make it sound like a proper name. So before I start rating one of the shonen big three, I need to break down exactly what the series is. If you haven't watched this show yet and don't want spoilers, you'd best get out of here now. Bleach is the story of Ichigo Kurosaki, a high school boy with the power to see spirits. He lives with his single father and two sisters at their clinic. One night, his family's clinic comes under attack by a creature called a Hollow, an evil spirit that feeds on human souls. Since Ichigo was the only person who could see it, he ended up trying to fight it to protect his family. And in the middle of that fight, a Soul Reaper named Rukia Kuchiki is injured. In a desperate gambit to save both herself and the Kurosaki family, Rukia bestows her powers onto Ichigo and makes him a substitute Soul Reaper. Soul Reapers are spirits, or Shinigami more accurately, I think, responsible for maintaining balance between the world of the living and the Soul Society. Basically, they purify hollows by killing them and turning them back into human souls. So this is where shit starts to hit the fan. Apparently, making Ichigo a Soul Reaper was a highly illegal maneuver. And not only that, but it drained Rukia of all her power and stranded her in the world of the living. So Ichigo is forced to fill in for her and kill hollows. His semi-ordinary school life is now full of random missions to go chop up some demons. And in the middle of that, he's hunted down by Uryu Ishida, who's something called a Quincy. Apparently, Quincy's were all exterminated by the Soul Reapers, and Uryu is the last one. I'm gonna put a little asterisk right there for now because, well, things are gonna get real confusing in the near future. Back on track, Uryu and Ichigo have this whole best frenemies thing going on, and they fight alongside each other in spite of the fact that they're both total asses to each other all the time. Fast forward after a little bit more backstory on the waifu material, Orihime, and the muscle man Chad Sato, and the coolest character in the series being introduced, Kisuke Urehara. And we get to the point where the Soul Society sends in the big guns to arrest Rukia, her older brother Byakuya, and her friend Renji Ibara. Ichigo tries to fight back and save her, but gets his ass kicked, loses his powers, then goes on one of the best training arcs in anime as he regains his powers plus more, and then battles his way through the Soul Society to save Rukia. And that's just the start of this story. I'm not going to give the entire frickin' synopsis to this story because the video would end up being super long and, well, I do this in my free time. I have a full-time job that eats up 8 hours of my day, and I have other things I do as hobbies. I don't feel like doing that much editing. Besides, I've spoiled enough already. So, what's the deal with this show? Seriously, I'm asking and not rhetorically. I found myself lost at times as to what the fuck was going on with this show, and I felt like it just flip-flopped or failed to explain certain important details. Sometimes terms would get thrown in and I'd feel like I missed something somewhere because shit wasn't explained. And all those little things that just didn't make sense to me, I am willing to admit that it's probably just the fact that I'm special. There's also the huge issue of the fact that Bleach is a filler sandwich, with close to a third of the series being entirely irrelevant material that has zero bearing on the rest of the story. There's this whole arc involving soul-sucking creatures called Bounce, who are just this world's version of vampires, that does nothing for the story. And as if that wasn't enough, there are also scattered distraction arcs thrown in along the way, which is frankly really annoying. But let's balance out my negativity with some positivity. Bleach has a really cool power system. Each Soul Reaper has a sword called a Zanpakuto. Generally, they come in the form of a katana, but there are a few unique ones, like Ichigo's and Soifon's. Okay, so each Zanpakuto has two special states. Shikai, which activates the Soul Reaper's unique individual power, and a Bankai, which is an ultimate power that comes with some ridiculous effect. For instance, Byakuya's Shikai allows him to turn his sword into fragments that he can control, creating a swarm of glittering blades he can manipulate with ease. His Bankai is just that but bigger, creating thousands of swords with the same property. Senbon Zakura is just ridiculous. And it's not even the most overpowered one of them all. But hey, since we're on the subject, we might as well talk about the main character. Ichigo's powers aren't all that flashy, and I don't think he's even the strongest Soul Reaper in the series. His Shikai, Getsuga Tensho, is simply a ranged attack that creates a powerful energy wave. It's strong enough to injure even some of the most powerful Soul Reaper captains. It pretty much becomes Ichigo's signature move, much like Naruto with the Rasengan or Goku with the Kamehameha. But his most powerful ability is obviously his Bankai, Tensa Zangetsu. This power makes his sword, which is normally a massive blade, a much smaller, katana-like weapon with a black blade. But that change also comes with a massive boost to physical abilities, as well as a huge increase to the power of Getsuga Tensho. Basically, Ichigo got the power of generic shonen protagonist power boost. But don't let his powers being boring fool you. There are some really cool powers in this series. Illusion, pyromancy, ice manipulation. Hell, there's one person whose Bankai is a fucking rocket launcher! Ultimately, you're best to experience it yourself though, and learn exactly what everyone is capable of. But there are other good things about this show to talk about. Like the fact that Bleach even has one of my favorite final battles in all of anime. Final battles in anime, particularly in shonen anime, tend to drag on for an eternity, as the hero struggles against an impossibly strong BBEG for like 50 episodes, before pulling a random power boost out of his ass to win the fight. Bleach doesn't do that for Ichigo vs. Aizen. In fact, it was a very refreshing thing to see the protagonist be the one who way outclasses the villain. It's safe to say that Ichigo dominates Aizen in the strength department, and the only reason Aizen is even a problem is because of his pseudo-omnipotence. And with Ichigo's final Getsuga Tensho, where he sacrifices all his powers for one final attack, he finally strikes Aizen down to the point where they can seal him away. I personally think that would have been a great and very cathartic way to end the story, but it didn't stop there. That's why I have to complain about it a bit, and why I put an asterisk next to that whole last Quincy thing, but more on that in a bit. Honestly, it felt kinda dumb that Ichigo got his powers back after sacrificing them to defeat Aizen. I felt like it detracted from his final sacrificial act. Now, it's not nearly as bad as the Dragon Balls, which take all consequence out of any bad choice or mistake, but it still felt like the story was being dragged out more than it needed to. After that, I was really worried about the Boruto effect setting in. But overall, I think the pros outweigh the cons, and I'm glad it did continue after that, because Thousand Year Blood War has been the best part of Bleach. So surprise, surprise, as I've been alluding to this whole time, it turns out that Uryu was not the last Quincy. In fact, there's a whole army of them left over, and they've decided to kill all the Soul Reapers because they can't coexist due to the differences in their powers. So they attack the Soul Society, kill a bunch of characters I couldn't remember the names of, steal some Bankai from the captains, and then fuck off. Oh, the old captain guy with the Bernie sword died too. Big whoop. So now, Ichigo has to deal with his inner demons for like the 8th time after the big baddie destroyed his Bankai. And then he finds out that he's actually a Quincy. Right, I probably forgot to mention that his father is a Soul Reaper captain and his mother is a Quincy. There's also a hollow sealed inside his soul. Look, if there's a thing you can be in this series, Ichigo will inevitably become that thing. He's a hollow, a human, a Soul Reaper, and a Quincy. He was also temporarily a Fullbringer, like Sato, and I think Orihime? I think the only power set he didn't get was the Bount powers. So, Ichigo is the ultimate amalgamation of every possible thing in the universe. And after finally sorting that out, his Zanpakuto undergoes its final transformation. You might think I'm complaining about the story, but you'd be wrong. I'm just trying to cut it short in a comedic way. I don't particularly have huge complaints about the story itself. I have that minor gripe about the final Getsuga Tensho not being, well, final, but I am willing to set that aside for how much I actually like Thousand Year Blood War. Blood War actually fixed one of my big issues with this show, its lack of visual appeal. Some of the fights in the opening act of Thousand Year Blood War were the kind of eye candy I like to see out of big-name battle shonens. It was flashier than the original, and it came with a whole host of awesome powers and visual effects that made it satisfying to watch. And that opening scene with the whole crew rolling up on a bunch of hollows, it got me hyped, and I'm not even a Bleach fan. And Iwak. How do you pronounce that shit? Yuhabaha. Seriously? That is pronounced Yuhabaha. No. Yuhabaha serious brain injury if you think that's what that spells. Yhwach is one of those villains who presents himself as adequately ruthless and intimidating to be the final villain. He fills the role, though not as well as Aizen did, in my opinion, of the final boss, and even has some really cool powers to go with it. Thousand Year Blood War has been a treat for me, and I'm not even a Bleach fan. Wait, I think I said that already. Alright, let's move on. My serious issues with Bleach are to do with the fact that I found a lot of things about this show incredibly boring. There were tons of characters that I just didn't care to remember. A lot of the Vizards I can't recall names for. And a lot of the lieutenants of the Soul Society were entirely forgettable. I mean, Rangiku has that amazing personality. And Renji is forced in your face enough to actually remember him. Like that time he showed up at Ichigo's house with a shotgun. But all in all, the rest of them I don't really remember much about. Point is, there are a lot of characters, and most of them feel empty in the anime. But there are those that are worth remembering, and those who actually have good personalities. The main cast, for one, are a good bunch of people, and a handful of the captains are worth paying attention to, if only for the fact that their powers are cool in some cases. But the most boring part of the series was actually the fights. The animation is very unimpressive, and it made fights feel like they were unimportant events at times. Unless there was a Bankai involved, fights ended up looking like two dudes just playing with their swords. There was nothing visually spectacular about them, and the whole reason I was watching Bleach was for epic sword fights. The last thing I wanted to see was a couple of people just clinking their blades together repeatedly. At least if the big moments had been really super visually satisfying, there would have been some payoff to going through it all. But I didn't really see a whole lot of that happening. I personally wasn't a huge fan of Bleach until Thousand Year Blood War started airing. Bleach fights lacked a certain amount of visual draw in the sword fighting, and ended up just being battles where two people locked blades and pushed against each other for long periods of time. And it could just be that it's largely due to the era in which it was created. But that's neither here nor there. In these sorts of drawn-out shonen battle series, the payoff for working through the dragged-out story is usually some level of epic fight or incredibly gratifying development in the story. But I felt like a lot of the fights were underwhelming. Take Ichigo versus Byakuya, for instance. There wasn't anything terribly impressive going on with the animation. It was satisfying to see Ichigo's Getsuga and his Bankai in that fight. And it wasn't the worst thing I've ever seen, but watching it back, I felt more inclined to skip it than watch it again. And that there pretty much sums up my opinion of Bleach the anime. It's a one-and-done series. It isn't horrible by any means, and there are actually elements that make it worthy of that big 3 spot, but I found myself disillusioned with it after trying to watch some of the old episodes again. Unlike anime like Naruto, which has its own massive set of problems, I know, and ReZero, shows I could watch again and again and still love, Bleach just doesn't do it for me. Alright, time to put a wrap on this. Without Thousand Year Blood War, Bleach is a 6.1 out of 10. Filler, underwhelming visuals, and too many characters jammed into the story ended up making it something I couldn't find it in me to watch again. But there's still a level of intrigue that made it somewhat worth watching the first time. And the story is not appalling. It's actually a pretty well written story if you look at the details and the messaging behind it. Moving on to Thousand Year Blood War, it rates at a good 8.10 for me. It's been exciting, and I've learned more about characters who were already cool to begin with. Overall, Bleach is a nice 6.9 out of 10 for me. It's not quite at that 7 mark, and Thousand Year Blood War does a good deal to make it better, but it can't balance out the slog it took to get there. It's not my favorite thing in the world, but it's by far not the worst thing I've ever watched. Thanks for tuning in. Please, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and consider subscribing. And if you have something you feel you need to add, or if you just want to tear me a new one for any number of my jokes or negative things I said about Bleach, you can leave it in the comments. Have a great day and a wonderful week. Later.